All right, welcome to Rotary. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. We are Rotarians going places. We are Rotarians who are people of action, and we've got a great program lined up for you today. So to get us started, our greeters are Dan McLaughlin and Steve Hahn. Please unmute and say hello.
Hello, welcome everybody.
Welcome to Rotary.
All right, thank you so much. Great to see you on, and what is Dan's very first Zoom, I understand. So well done, well done. You've got it mastered already. So at this point in time, if you're not speaking, if you could please mute, we'd appreciate it. But we do have Teresa Atkinson up next to talk to us a little bit about our music selection today. Teresa.
Well, we picked a clip that's actually kind of long, so my introduction is super brief. I basically Googled the time period, and this was the #1 song in 1942. So I hope you enjoy it. Carolyn, you have to share the sound too.
Chattanooga choo-choo, run it down again. Let's go. 1, 2.
She means that she can't afford. I can't afford to go to Chattanooga choo-choo. Have you been in there? Oh, gosh, my fare. You say you had? But not a nickel to spare. Well, I do declare. You leave the Pennsylvania station about 1:15, read a magazine, and then you're in Baltimore. Dinner in the diner. Nothing could be finer than to have your ham and eggs in Carolina. When you hear the whistle blowing 8 to the bar, then you know that Tennessee is not very far. You have to haul the coal in, got to keep it rolling. Whoa, Chattanooga, there you are. Chattanooga, choo-choo, there you are.
Absolutely wonderful music selection. Doug Rich noted his hip went out just watching it. I think that we're all going to be tapping our toes later on today with that song stuck in our heads. Thank you so much for sharing it. Next up, we've got Amy Mabe with our invocation. Amy.
All right, thank you, President Jennifer, fellow Rotarians and guests. With our speaker talking today about history, I have this prayer to offer with a focus on remembrance. Dear Father in heaven, I long to rest in your love, but some days I get so distracted by all that surrounds me. Friends or family members whose lives are not working, who are struggling with debt or addictions or loss, who are challenged with work issues. Things that take my focus away from you and can harden my heart. Social media, politics, the pandemic, and social injustice. Often I have no words for all that I encounter on a daily basis, and the end of the day leaves me frustrated and uneasy. I only have the gift of my presence, my love, my prayers, but too often these days my presence is insincere, my love shallow, my prayers thin and frail or infrequent. I forget that you are here with them and with me. I forget that in you all things are possible, and I forget to rest, to trust, to depend on you. Gracious and loving Creator, help all of us here today to remember that you have not and will not forget us, and that trusting in you is the way to peace in our hearts. Amen.
Thank you, Amy, very much for that lovely invocation. Next up, we've got past President Eric Silvers to talk to us about our MLK Playground build coming up on Saturday.
Well, thank you, President Jennifer. I wanted to make sure that I let you know that this is our third delay that we've had on this. Wow. But no, we are up and ready to go. The COVID doesn't stop us. The smoke doesn't stop us, even though we're praying for rain tomorrow. It doesn't stop Rotarians. Thank you very much, Dan Sullivan, for coordinating this, even though your term was over as of July 1, but we still have you. But we're going to be there at 8:30 till 4:30-ish to be able to finish the project over at Martin Luther King Park. Bring your masks, a drill. Also, the food is going to be provided by OIC with Adrian Gardner. And this is a partnership that is going to be so wonderful to be able to see of the community, the city, as well as the 3 Rotary clubs, along with the Rotary Trust and the district. So I look forward to being able to see you out there. I'll be working with this drill. It's something that they're supposed to be having me to do. But it's going to be great to be able to see all of you. I think we have around 40+ volunteers. So if you're not signed up, give us a shout. If you're going to be in the area that you'd like to just drive by and wave and say hello, we're going to be practicing social distancing. We're going to be practicing everything to be able to get this project all taken care of. And thank you for all the lead people like my man Jordan. Thank you in advance for all the things that you guys have done. All right, thanks.
Thank you so very much, past President Eric. There are so many wonderful volunteer opportunities that are here coming your way, not only there at that particular event in the playground build, but also don't forget this weekend is the Fair Food Fest that's going on at State Fair Park. We are collecting food for Operation Harvest at that event. So if you haven't already signed up, there are a few shifts available on Sunday to do that. And of course, just think of us as you get hungry this evening through Sunday and stop by with some canned food to donate. I know that I've got my name on an elephant ear this evening, so I look forward to seeing you all out there. And also regarding Operation Harvest, we're still in need of a number of volunteers to help drop off bags on the different routes, as well as collect food on the 3rd of October. So you're going to have another opportunity in your email box later today to sign up for those particular roles. Please look at your calendar and consider joining us. We have such a great need in our community now more than ever, to cite a cliche, but please take a look at your calendar and consider signing up for those jobs. Next up, we've got Sergeant at Arms with Margaret Filkins. Margaret.
Oh, thank you, President Jennifer, Rotarians, and guests. Talking about the fair, I missed the summer and everything like that. And so I was thinking about how when I look outside right now and I get this false feeling that it's already cold days, falls, winters, things like that. And I'm a summer person. So I'm going to give you one last blast with summer vibe, and let's talk about some summer activities. Remember to send your money to Caroline. Keep track of what I ask you. First off, let's start with the months of summer. You likely know that June was named after Juno, but do you know what she is the goddess of? Anybody? It's marriage, childbirth, and pregnancy. So if you knew that, congratulations. But if you didn't and you got married or had a baby in June, pay $1. Okay, so let's try July. Who is the person who named July after Julius Caesar? I'll give you some choices. Was it Julius Caesar himself? Was it Mark Antony, the Roman general? Marcus Junius Brutus, as in A2 Brutus? Or was it Julius Caesar's mom? Anybody? Anybody? All right, it was actually Mark Antony who named it. Okay, so let's go to the final fun month of August. This is named after Julius Caesar's nephew who had received the title Augustus. So those of you who took Greek and Latin and all of that, see if you can tell me, what does Augustus mean? I have 3 choices here and I'll take anything that's similar. Augustus. Robust, close. Reverend, exalted, or venerable. Okay, so that was tough. Here's a freebie fact. Did you know that the watermelon is not a fruit, but is actually a member of the vegetable family, which is the same vegetable family as the cucumber? So if you did not have watermelon this summer, even if it was a crazy summer, pay $1 because you still should have had some watermelon. Okay, so I'm going to switch it up from one of my favorite summer favorites to a summer nuisance that really seems to like me. How long have mosquitoes been on Earth? Less than 10 million years, 15 to 20 million years, 20 to 30 million years, or more than 30 million years? Yeah, David Links is right. More than 30. So is Teresa. Everybody's filing in. You would think after that long they'd be done drinking blood and find something else, but they look for me every time. Okay, so finally, in homage to our Canadian friends, what is the Slurpee capital of the world? Winnipeg, Manitoba, Goose Bay, which is up in Newfoundland, Labrador, Vancouver, British Columbia, or Ottawa, Ontario? The Slurpee capital of the world. Winnipeg, Goose Bay, Vancouver, or Ottawa? So far, nobody has it, so now we're narrowing it down. Union Gap. Yes, Randy, it is Union Gap. No, it is Winnipeg in Manitoba. They drink a whopping 400,000 cups per month, even when it is negative 45 Celsius, which is negative 49 Fahrenheit. That is crazy. I love Slurpees, but not that much. So that's it. Thank you, everyone. Go to the Food Fest this weekend. Work with Operation Harvest. Go Rotary. Have a great day.
Thank you, Margaret. We appreciate that. Next, we've got Mina Worthington with our speaker introduction. Mina.
Good afternoon, Rotarians, and welcome Robert Franklin. Robert Franklin is the Assistant Director and Activist of the Hanford History Project. He is Director of the Hanford Oral History Project and a lecturer in the History Department at WSUTC. He is the co-editor with Robert Bauman on 2 books using oral histories to tell the history of the Hanford region. The first volume of that series, Nowhere to Remember, Hanford, White Bluffs, and Richland to 1943, was released in 2018 by WSU Press. And the forthcoming book, Echoes of Exclusion and Resistance, Voices from the Hanford Region, is to be published by WSU Press in November. Robert, I've seen your presentation before at another Rotary group in Tri-Cities. It is entertaining, it is insightful, it is interesting. So please, please share with the rest of my friends.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to set up my screen here to share. My audio should still work. Okay, well, thank you, Mina, very much for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be here today virtually in this crazy year that is 2020. So as was mentioned, today I'm going to be talking to you about the pre-Manhattan Project history here. A lot of this material comes from the first book that I co-wrote and co-edited with my fellow faculty member, Bob Bauman. But also I've been a docent at the Manhattan Project National Historical Park since 2018, and usually doing the pre-Manhattan Project history tours. So this has been a real interest point of mine for several years. My graduate work was on this era of American history. And so today I'm going to be talking about kind of the work, the community, and the remembrance in the town, specifically of Hanford, White Bluffs, and Richland. I just want to start off by saying that for this book, we're not able to do any oral histories at the time with this project with any Native American groups in the area, partially because of our association with the Department of Energy and just kind of the logistical and legal issues there. But Native American voices do feature prominently in an entire chapter in our next book coming out this November about exclusion and resistance, and we'll really kind of track that history, the long history of Native American settlement and habitation and exclusion from what became the Hanford site. So this book specifically focused on, and this presentation focuses on the history, what I'll call the Euro-American history of those towns. That being said, I will, sorry, let me not get too far ahead of myself. So this historic map from 1932 gives you an idea of where these towns are situated in regards to this section of southeastern Washington. So in this part of our state and here in Benton County, the Columbia River kind of turns east and then south. White Bluffs is near the Horn, kind of on the top there, right by where it says Grant County. You can see White Bluffs is a little inland. And Hanford is about 7 miles south of that. As you can see, Richland is much farther to the south. In fact, it's right there on kind of the south eastern edge of the map. White Bluffs and Hanford residents at this because of the lack actually of good transportation to Richland, and because the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad ended at the town of Hanford, White Bluffs and Hanford residents were more commercially and socially orientated towards Yakima and the Beverly area, rather than to Kennewick and Pasco, the twin cities of that time. Richland was much more orientated towards the Kennewick and Pasco, simply because of its closeness to them, and its distance between Hanford and White Bluffs made the Hanford and White Bluffs area an ideal place to site the Hanford part of the Manhattan Project, and Richland became then the ideal bedroom community for that project. But this is later, and so we're here to talk about the pre-Manhattan Project residents of this land. You'll also notice a couple other small, non-existent communities, or to be more specific, really, railroad stops, whistle stops on the railroad, including Riverland, Haven, Allard, Julia, were all whistle stops on that branch line railroad that ran through this area. And then kind of moving south, Fruitvale north of Richland is actually kind of right now where WSU Tri-Cities is, and the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. Okay. So the original inhabitants of this area are, of course, our native peoples. And in no particular order, the tribes that are the groups that have the most association with this land are the Nez Perce, the Yakima, the Umatilla, the Wanapum, the Colville, Palouse, the Walla Walla, and the Cayuse all have ancestral ties in some way to this land, having intensively and continuously used the land for many thousands of years. Some of these groups currently participate in Hanford cleanup. Shown here is Lalik or Lalik, also known as Rattlesnake Mountain, one of the most sacred sites in the Hanford area and one of the highest points in this entire region. And that's seen here from Horn Rapids, or the Wannawish, which roughly translates to rock fishing place here on the Yakima or Tapatio River. Another very important site of gathering salmon. And in fact, this area of the Tapatio is still has fishing platforms for exercising those 1855 treaty rights. Pictured here is the Columbia or the Chiawana. The main waterway, the main highway in this area of Washington, and an incredibly important resource for people from early native residents and the collection of salmon until now. Located within the Hanford site, near the Hanford Irrigation Pump House, are the Coyote Rapids, another very important site to area tribes, and a location of a former longhouse built and occupied by the Wanapum prophet Smohala. Okay, so our kind of timeline for Euro-American settlement is roughly here. The 1855 treaty with the Yakima and others more or less opened this area to Euro-American settlement, which had been going on in small bits illegally up to the treaty point, but this kind of set aside large tracts of land for farming and habitation. And then White Bluffs is the oldest of these three towns, and really arises out of a ferry crossing, which across the Columbia, and that ferry crossing is a part of the national park now, and that ferry crossing first served gold miners that were going up to the Spokane area and north of there to Kellogg and northern Idaho. And that ferry crossing kind of grew slowly. There are not a lot of agricultural possibilities within the Priest Rapids Valley without the advent of modern irrigation. And that modern irrigation kind of really comes at around the turn of the 20th century, when the towns of Richland and White Bluffs are established, and irrigation companies are formed to bring water to those to some of the residents there. And this there was a lot of pressure in the early 20th century to find more irrigatable land. Just 10 years before the turn of the century, famous historian Frederick Jackson Turner had posited that the West was closed and there was no more American frontier. And so those kind of desperate to keep the myth of the American frontier alive turned towards the arid West and this new irrigation technology, and urged Congress to pass the 1902 Newlands Reclamation Act, which created the Bureau of Reclamation and then agriculture or irrigation districts. And so this, we started to have slow settlement then of the farming settlement, permanent settlement of the Priest Rapids Valley, outside of just taking advantage of this ferry crossing. And so here's kind of a snapshot of one of the early town of Hanford. White Bluffs, by 1940, by the time of the eviction, White Bluffs had about 600 residents, Hanford had about 400, and then Richland had about 250, to give you an idea of the size of these towns. Kind of small agricultural hubs. Pasco was by far the largest town in this region, with about 3,000 or 4,000 residents by 1940. So irrigation, as I mentioned before, is one of the keys to unlocking the fertile soils of the mid-Columbia Priest Rapids Valley. And that 1902 Newlands Reclamation Act helped to provide the support necessary to irrigate the lands, bringing somewhat reliable water to the mid-Columbia, although fights with the irrigation company and the challenges of irrigating these really easily drained soils continue on, still to this day. There's so much water lost in a lot of the irrigation works. But before a crop could be sown, the land would first have to be cleared. Farmers would first have to clear their lands of stones, glacial erratics left over from the Ice Age floods, and then they would employ a horse or tractor-drawn sagebrush scrubber to clear the land before leveling. And they pictured here is a sagebrush scrubber on the Edward Anderson farm that would have been pulled behind either a horse team or a tractor that would just, literally rip up any vegetation on the land to get it ready for farming. Although while these scrubbers were the common method, Madeline Gillis, who grew up in Richland, remembers, I found a blasting cap that my dad had brought from Butte to blow up the sagebrush. It was big and tough to make more land, And so I found an old one, and I thought it was full of dirt, and I picked it up, and it blew up. It took my fingers off, but I made it. There were 5 different companies that supplied irrigation to the area, the 2 most important of which were the Hanford Irrigation and Power Company, or the HIPC, and the White Bluff City and Orchard Tracts. The HIPC used the canal system with concrete weirs and various forms of piping, clay, cement, or wood stave piping, to supply water to just the fields, not to houses. The White Bluffs irrigation used wood stave piping and supplied water to the town and to the fields. Other farmers and companies used a combination of all of these in their own pumps and sprinklers if needed. When, and not if, failures happened, farmers would try, often in vain, to save their fields and orchards by hand carrying water or constructing their own irrigation systems if they were relying on company irrigation. Abandonment of farms from the 4 decades that these towns existed, abandonment was very common. The primary focus of utility resources was towards the farms. Most of the houses, the vast majority of houses, lacked running water and electricity well into the beginning of World War II. And that was the main reason why many of them were torn down by the Manhattan Project engineers instead of being saved and moved, because they simply lacked, like most rural houses in the beginning of World War II, they lacked utilities. And so here's a picture of some of this piping. This is on the Bruggerman Ranch, one of the stops in the pre-Manhattan Project tour. This is what's known as vitrified clay piping. This is the gold standard of piping at this time. These vitrified clay pipes, kind of the same type of clay that you would make to make paving bricks for paving streets. Incredibly hard and durable. These would be laid down and then joined by concrete to connect the sections. And this is a main line, then feeders, usually wood piping, would come off of this line into the fields. Bruggerman had, on his 500-acre ranch, had over 5,000 miles of piping. And it was the largest and most profitable ranch in the entire area. The location is approximately near the Vernita Bridge today, if any of you are familiar enough with that area. So I have a bunch of clips from the oral histories that we did, now stretching back about 7 years ago. And so I'm going to play, these are each about a minute. And here, Madeline Gillis is going to talk a bit about irrigation and setting up the farm.
Weirs that went out to the fields and filled up, and you could water from there. They built little wooden waterways to where they wanted it, and then they'd have rills, and they'd flood the rills and then move it on to the next part of the field till they got it watered. And the ditch riders came by and kept watch on the wherever it come out from the irrigation ditch. I forgot what they called them.
Okay, and in this slide, Robert Fletcher describes the irrigation system on his father's land, just north of Richland.
The company brought water to the edge of your property, and then you had to put in the pipe yourself. There were cement pipes, about 3 feet long, 40 pounds, 8 inches in diameter, and he said he put in several hundred feet of this pipe, and he thought he'd done a pretty good job. He'd worked hard, turned the water on, it just leaked all over, so he had to do it all over again. He was pretty persistent. And then they had a hard time the first few years because he was small, a small person, and a greenhorn. About the only income work you could get then was to work with for the irrigation company if you wanted to earn some money. And usually that was when the water was shut off and they had to clean and repair the ditches, open ditches.
Okay. Many different crops were grown in this area, a mix of typical subsistence crops and then also cash crops to bring in income for the farm. Apples were first tried, and obviously Washington is known for its apples, but were later abandoned in the Great Depression as they were seen as kind of a luxury fruit. That and the section of the valley is the warmest farming section in the state of Washington, and many of the apple growers found that because of the later frosts, the apples didn't quite get that nice color on them. And color was the most important feature of apple marketing in the beginning of the 20th century. And so areas like Wenatchee and further up the Yakima Valley typically had better success with apples. During the Great Depression, most of the farmers ripped out their young apple trees, and later farmers planted a mix of asparagus, alfalfa, hay, and soft fruits like peaches, apricots, and of course grapes. These soft fruits or stone fruits had a higher markup on them, and were available earlier in the season, and so were a better fit for farmers here. The most success that farmers had was with the latter, the soft fruits and grapes, and also with cream from cow's milk. The skim milk, as Gordon Cass, one of the interviewees, recounted to me, the skim milk left over from processing cream was never drank. It was always just fed to the pigs. They would never think about drinking skim milk. Dale McGee remembers that in the 1920s, everybody thought that apples were the things to grow in the area, apples and pears, so they planted orchards. Well, they found out that they couldn't compete with Wenatchee because the apples wouldn't turn color, and in those days, color had practically everything to do with price. So they would go on the market and they wouldn't be a prime apple. So suddenly they discovered in the late 20s and early 30s that it was just prime country for soft fruit, cherries, apricots, and peaches. The people that had caught on to this toward the end of the 30s were starting to make money. And these people were just starting to make a real good living when war broke out. And of course, then the Manhattan Project moved in. The establishment of White Bluffs formed around the important ferry crossing, as I mentioned earlier. Steamships were a vital transportation and communication link to Hanford and White Bluffs before the coming of the railroad in 1913. After this, the White Bluffs crossing was still used, but the steam traffic steadily declined in the 1920s. The Wheel family, the patriarch, Matt Wheel here pictured, ran that crossing for several decades and owned a large ranch on the east bank of the Columbia in what is the border of Grant and Franklin County. Lloyd Wheel, the son of M.M. Wheel and father to Dick Wheel, who was interviewed for our project, remembers rowing across the river for school twice a day, rowing across the river from his ranch to the to the White Bluffs High School. And the railroad system was dominant for about a decade and a half until the mid-1930s when trucking began to supplant railroads. So railroad came very late to this area, and its dominance lasted for only quite a short time. So here's a man at an apple packing warehouse outside of the town of Hanford, right next to the train depot. The economy at Hanford and White Bluffs was typical for towns of this size, of less than 1,000 people. Small schools, a mercantile store that sold the basics that couldn't be grown, things like sugar, coffee, flour, and clothing. A post office, a rail station, a hotel, and a garage made up the majority of the businesses. Much of the Hanford site today that was not built on by the Manhattan Project during the Cold War looks like this picture, sand and sagebrush. Picnicking in the sagebrush was a welcome family event, although the sand could and did pose a hazard to automobiles of the time. And this is just one of my favorite pictures in our entire collection. Fun was had. This is kind of a Halloween teachers party for the staff of the White Bluff Schools District, dated sometime, I think, in the 1930s. Of note in this picture, too, is the river stones used to make part of the porch there. Lumber was very expensive. Obviously, the Priest Rapids Valley is not known for trees, so all the lumber had to be imported. And so many residents used the available stones for foundations or other parts of their homes, including on the Bruggerman Ranch. Most of the house and the outbuildings were built with a mixture of concrete and river rock. On the left, a common occurrence, and something I learned in my historical research for teenagers, was a soup party, where which is what it sounds like. Groups of teenagers would bring a pot and ingredients for soup and make soup next to the river. Kind of a nice, wholesome teenage activity. And then on the right, kind of a rare picture of the Columbia when it froze over with two boys playing on ice in the middle of the river. School districts would often charter a local farmer to drive the school bus, which was usually just a converted truck with bench seats built on a flatbed and a canvas roof. Edmund Anderson was the first school bus driver for the White Bluff St. Hanford School District. And all of the photos, historical photos shown to you today, come from his collection passed down to us by his great-granddaughter, Charmaine. The White Bluffs Band was known throughout the Priest Rapids Valley, and it was led by Fred English over there on the top right or top left, a druggist who had actually studied under John Philip Sousa. Rabbit drives were a very common occurrence in the arid West and were no stranger to White Bluffs. Rabbits were, and still in some ways are, pests to farmers growing crops like hay and alfalfa and asparagus. And rabbit drives were a community building event throughout the arid West, from all the way from the Southwest to White Bluffs and even into Canada, where the entire community would come together and kind of encircle a large field and drive all the rabbits to the center and dispose of the rabbits, and then usually throw a feast of rabbit stew. Swimming, when not farming and working hard, swimming in the Columbia River was a popular activity of all ages. Here's a picture of a group of swimmers outside of the Wheel Ranch, that ranch that's across the river from where White Bluffs is today. And in this next slide, Leatrice Reed was going to talk about the importance of swimming to the children.
Oh, the river. Oh, the river. The river was a godsend. We learned to swim. First summer we were there. And we had a raft. The dads had got together and built this big raft. And if you could swim out to the raft, I was not supposed to, but I did. And the little Lao boy wasn't supposed to either. He was just learning to swim. And he went under. And my sister Dorothy was a really good swimmer. And he went under for the third time, and she went down and got him. And got him out on that, pulled him up, and there was a couple of guys up there and pulled him up on that raft, and they turned him over on his stomach, and the water just poured, and he lived, but he wouldn't have lived. And every one of those kids at White Bluffs were just as devoted as that to the river. That was our playground. We had to do our work in the morning because it was cool enough. And the summers over there were, boy, they were hot. But we could go in and get in the swimming pool then, and our.
Among the interviewees that we interviewed in the early 2010s, the Great Depression was kind of the most significant event remembered by them, and many of them were just children during the Great Depression. In addition, we've collected an earlier series of interviews done a decade prior, so in the early 2000s, around 2003 to 2005, by the Hanford Cultural Resources Laboratory. And those interviewers who were teenagers or young adults during the Great Depression have a very drastic or very different outlook on the Great Depression. Those that were older, teenagers or young adults, tended to remember the struggles of the Great Depression, whereas those that were children, such as Catherine Finley, who we'll hear from next, were likely insulated from the worst parts of the Great Depression and by their parents, and actually remember it with some fondness in terms of how the families kind of came together. And so really, age and part of the struggle with doing oral histories is dealing with people's different reflections on historical events and how their age and their situation in life can drastically affect how they view significant events like the Great Depression.
But they were all very successful in fruit. My dad didn't have any fruit, but he traded a sheep for a fruit, bartered, and we were very fortunate all during the Depression that's what happened. So we were never hungry. We didn't really know. I imagine the folks knew what the Depression was. Us kids didn't. We never had boughten toys that I remember of. My dad would carve things out of wood, mostly bark that come down the river. I don't know, boats and mangers and whatever happened to be handy.
So, her fond memories, right, of trading for food and bartering and handmade toys likely reflects a different reality of a family struggling, of a father unable to purchase toys and fashioning toys out of driftwood coming down the river. Certainly a thrifty experience, right, but one that, clearly kind of a sheltered experience of the Great Depression. Morris Slavens, who was one of these older interviewees, he was in his early 20s during the same time, recounted the efforts of the Depression on his father's orchards. Morris said his father, continued to try and raise apples, but it was a losing game. He borrowed money from my mother's sister. He borrowed money on his insurance, and he just couldn't make it. Things got so bad that they would dump the apples in the old rock crusher holes, and they also dumped them in the river. I recall going down to the Columbia and just seeing that water was just red with apples floating down the river. So unable to sell their produce, often they would have to dump them and then rip the trees out. Edith King, another older interviewee, recalls the effects of the Depression on her father and the local economy. She said, "Dad lost his job in the irrigation office and he had to go back to walking the ditch. The thing is, he was paid all right, but they were, I think they call them chits. They're just a piece of paper worth whatever he could get, but you couldn't cash them. They had to hold them. Well, eventually you could get something out of them, and when he finally did, he only got a percentage of that money." Walt Grisham remembers the elation of getting through the Depression and the sense of injustice that the farms were taken away just when things started to get better. "We came through the Depression by the skin of our teeth," Walt said. "Just when things began to look up, then it happened. We were just getting by during the Depression. At the very time when it looked like it might change and develop into some really hopeful improvements, the bottom dropped out." Now we'll hear from Gordon Cass, whose parents also struggled during the Depression.
When I was small, I grew up, we had an apple orchard. But during the Depression in the 30s, apples was one thing that people didn't have to have. And consequently, the market went away. And at that time, peppermint was coming in, and he hired a county bulldozer to come in and bulldoze the trees out and plant peppermint. And raise peppermint as long as we.
Probably the defining experience of life at White Bluffs, Hanford, and Richland was the forced displacement of these communities for the Manhattan Project. Though through two community associations, the Old Timers Picnic, made up of Richland residents, and the Hanford White Bluffs Reunion Association, made up of Hanford White Bluffs residents, the community memory underwent a metamorphosis from a living community to one that lived on only through memory and became more and more insular as time went on. I'm going to skip that interview because I know it doesn't work, right? Well, actually, maybe I'll try to see if it works. It probably doesn't.
Have you ever been to any of the, I know they had the Hanford White Bluffs reunions. Were Richland people ever included in those? For the
I don't know about, we never were included as far as I know with Hanford and White Bluffs, but we had our own. Oh, it was called the Old Timers Picnic.
Old Timers Picnic.
And
okay.
you could not come to that unless you were here prior to 1943. And I remember one occasion there, I was living in the South at the time, in South Carolina. Came out from vacation. I was 36 years old, and I'm sitting at this table, and Mrs. John Dam, who had not seen me since I was a child, came up to me and said, "You must be Edith Long's little girl." And she patted me on the head like I was a little child. I'll never forget it. And I could not believe she remembered me all that time.
So here's the cover for the 1980 Hanford White Bluffs reunion booklet. Of note is the pastoral scene with Rattlesnake Mountain, or Lalique in the background, this kind of quaint farming scene in front, and a native fishing platform in the former. The 1980 reunion featured trivia. Questions that one could only know if they were a real resident of Hanford and White Bluffs. For example, do you know what Jenny Copin's hometown is? I imagine this would be almost impossible trivia for anyone who was not born there to answer. But this, again, reflects this kind of insular nature of these reunions. And, of course, why the reunions ended up dying out in the early 2000s. Here are some pictures from the 1968 reunion. This reunion was special because it was the 25th anniversary of the displacement and thus the 25th anniversary of the Manhattan Project. And so this group here was celebrating a 25th anniversary of loss, versus while the rest of Richland and the Tri-Cities was celebrating 25th anniversary of this life-changing event for the region, and also the city of Richland was celebrating its 10th anniversary of privatization. This reunion was special, and there's so many pictures exist of it because it was the first we know of where residents were allowed to go out on site and visit their former homesteads. In previous years, the group met in Prosser, which is where the cemeteries were relocated to. And so here you can see at the bottom left there is the White Bluffs Ferry Landing, and the top right is the old White Bluffs Bank, which has actually now been restored and is part of the national park. You can go inside that. And so I wanted to mention the park as well. If anyone has not come down and taken a tour. Tours are, like most things, are not running this year, but we expect for them to be running once things open up back in phase 4. And there's 2 different tours, the pre-Manhattan Project tour and the B-Reactor tour. And here's the location information for the tour visitor center, and of course the website to get tours: Manhattan Project breactor.hanford.gov. And if you're just in general more interested in the national park, the National Park Service is very well represented on social media. So you can find them on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. They're constantly posting content, trying to engage with visitors right now during the coronavirus pandemic. And so I'm going to conclude with some quotes of residents and kind of this vein of remembrance of their of the towns that no longer exist, of nowhere to remember.
associated with this pump. And it sat out front. It was made, and everybody, a lot of people had them. Some had brick with a liner in it. But this one was cement, and it was kind of cone-shaped. And evidently it was a holding tank for the house, or whatever. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it was there, and that was still there. They hadn't knocked that down. That's the only way. And it set up on a hill. It was the first row of hills as you came down toward the river, dropped down to the river to Old Town. And so that was how we found it. But there wasn't any stumps of trees left. There wasn't anything left.
That was Leatrice recalling visiting her homestead in that 1968 reunion where she grew up. And like I mentioned before, most residents, every single house was knocked down by the government. Their orchards cut down. Their towns and their whole lifestyle effectively erased. And other residents have a variety of responses. Walt Grisham, who was interviewed in the early 2000s, remembered that White Bluffs was a great place to grow up. It was something, the river was there, we worked in the orchards, and we played in the river. Morris Slavens, who grew up in Hanford, had different feelings about the area. He said, after I left Hanford, I was really happy to get out of that hot, godforsaken place. I really was. And my last quote is also by Walt Grisham. And he remembered that we always refer to the Columbia, as our river. My dad used to say, because we spent some time in California, he said, boy, if California had this river down there, they would put up a fence around it and charge us just to see it. And so if you're interested in learning more about the pre-Manhattan Project history, the Nowhere to Remember book is available. And also we're working on other books in the series. We just had a book about the legacies of the Manhattan Project. This is a collection of essays about the social, political, cultural effects of the Manhattan Project on history and kind of reflecting back on that event. And then the third book in the series about race and racial resistance in the Tri-Cities area, including stories of the Wanapum, internment of Japanese Americans, and then stories of the Great Migration of African Americans to work at Hanford. That book will be coming out in November, and all of these are through WSU Press. And that concludes my presentation.
Robert, thank you so very much for joining us today for that really informative history. It's just really quite remarkable to learn about the background of this area. I saw some of the chat that was flying by talking about arranging another Rotary trip, so I hope that we get a chance to do that very soon. And if you're able to, if you don't mind, taking a few moments after we officially adjourn to answer any questions.
Sure.
We really appreciate the opportunity to speak
Sure.
with you further. All right, excellent. In honor of you speaking today, we are going to make a donation in your name to Yakima Rotary Charities that supports our scholarship programs, specifically academic and vocational scholarships and our playground builds and the different things that we do in the community. So again, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
So next up on our agenda is our Rotarians Are Going Places with Mike Hummel. Mike.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hey, everybody. I've got two good updates for you guys. The first is Mr. Russ Wilkinson has had a grandchild. Mr. Maverick Riley Wilkinson, the first grandchild of Russ and Kate Wilkinson, arrived on August the 23rd, weighing in at 7 pounds and 13 ounces. Maverick's proud parents are Riley and Paige Wilkinson. The Wilkinsons are over the top in love with little Maverick. They're blessed to have the next generation of Rotarians arriving in the great Yakima Valley. Congratulations to the whole family. And then my next announcement is for Mr. Bob Kreider, who recently announced his retirement from the Yakima Herald. And I reached out to Bob and asked him a couple of questions. And so I've got a couple of things to share for you there. First, I asked him how many years was he in the industry? More than 44, which is amazing. And then I asked him, what did you enjoy most about your career? And he had a couple of notes on that. As a reporter, the excitement of finding out new things and the camaraderie of working with fellow reporters with the common goal of letting people know what is going on in the community. The highlight was working at the Daily News in Longview after the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. The paper won the Pulitzer Prize in 1981 for that coverage. As an editor, he most enjoyed training and mentoring young reporters and watching them advance in their careers. And as a publisher, he most enjoyed helping steer the ship during the most transformative and challenging time in the history of newspapers. Actually, it's not something I truly enjoyed, but I'm proud of it. And overall, he says, making a difference in the community, whether by doing something as small as sharing personal stories that readers relate to or exploring issues that lead to positive change. Case in point was the tragic 2011 30-mile fire that killed 4 wildland firefighters from Yakima and Ellensburg. Our reporting revealed that the U.S. Forest Service supervisors ignored numerous safety protocols, contributing to those unnecessary deaths. Changes were then made within the Forest Service as a result of their reporting. I asked him, what are you most proud of from your career? It says, I'm most proud of the staff and the work that we have done during the past 6 months to publish a newspaper in print and online. The first 2 COVID-19 cases in Yakima County led me to order those who could work remotely, principally the news and advertising staffs, to leave our main building and begin working from home. We put health and safety measures into effect as soon as we could in an ever-changing world that was impacting businesses everywhere. There were many technological and communication challenges to overcome, and I'm amazed at how well our employees have done. In the meantime, those in press, the packaging center, and other functions that needed to work in one of our 3 buildings have done an exemplary job 7 days a week. We have around 150 employees, and I am in awe of what they have done under these circumstances. And I'm thankful we have only had 4 employees total test positive, and none of which became seriously ill. I asked him, is there any crazy or unusual stories you would like to share? And he said, I have plenty, but none that I'll share in public. And I said, okay, fair enough. And then finally, I asked him, what are you most looking forward to in retirement? And he said, we've bought a lot on a ridge in Northwest Spokane, and we'll soon start building a house there. By next May or June, we hope to be moved in, which will put us about 10 minutes away from our grandchildren and a like amount of time to a fantastic system of trails and other outdoor opportunities at Riverside State Park and the Little Spokane River Recreation Area. Congratulations to Bob on an amazing career, and congratulations to Russ on a beautiful new grandchild.
Thank you so very much, Mike, for sharing that great news for our Rotarians. Just by way of reminder to wrap up our meeting, don't forget we've got some excellent volunteer opportunities coming your way. The Fair Food Fest, stop by, pick up some wonderful food, drop off some canned goods, see if your schedule allows you to volunteer at that event on Sunday. Also check your calendar to see if you have time to stop by the MLK Park Playground build. Be sure to, you don't want to miss that. That's just going to be fantastic. So be sure to stop by there on Saturday. And also remember that a sign up is coming your way for Operation Harvest. We really need route drivers. So please consider that for volunteering as well. Our Rotarians are sure going places. Next week's meeting, we're going to get to hear from John Ball, who's going to share with us the history of the Central Washington State Fair. And after that, on the 1st of October, we're going to be hearing from a panel of speakers, Lowell Kruger, Brian Ketchum, and Melanie Rosen, to talk about affordable housing. And then the following week, Terry Pierce with the Washington Youth Academy will be joining us. So we'll look forward to seeing you on Zoom there. We are officially adjourned, but feel free to stay on with additional questions for our speaker, Robert Franklin.